Hey guys, welcome back to our online Sunday school. This week we're in Genesis chapter 39. But before we begin, I do have an announcement for you. And that is that this week's video will be the last video of this type that we do. We're going to continue to go through the book of Genesis together, but instead of doing it on the weekends with these videos, we're going to be doing it in person on Wednesday nights, starting this coming Wednesday. And so, while today we're covering Genesis 39, this coming Wednesday we'll be at the church at 7 o'clock doing Genesis chapter 40. And so I look forward to seeing you there. If you cannot join us on Wednesday nights at the church, I believe the plan is to continue to record the live Bible study and posting it to the internet. So hopefully you'll be able to continue to view that way as well. But a little something new as we take one more step, perhaps, to get back to life as normal before COVID struck. But that's for next week. This week we're in Genesis chapter 39. And in Genesis chapter 39, which I hope you've already read, by the way, if you haven't, go ahead and pause the video now and take a few moments to read it before we get started, because it is an interesting part of Joseph's story. We began Joseph's story, of course, in chapter 37. And chapter 39 begins by tying in with the end of chapter 37. After the interlude of chapter 38, which you remember stretched on for many years into the future, we're now taken back to Joseph's arrival in Egypt, where he was sold into slavery in the house of an Egyptian official named Potiphar. Now, Potiphar is described as an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the bodyguard. Now, there are a couple of things we could pull from that, but the most important is the implication of his position for Joseph's narrative, in that it means that he lives in the vicinity of Pharaoh. Because Potiphar is essentially a servant of Pharaoh, he's one of these officials who's over the Pharaoh's bodyguard. He lives where Pharaoh lives. And that means that now that Joseph has been sold into his house, that is Potiphar's house, Joseph has now ended up in the vicinity of Pharaoh. Now, the slave traders took him down to Egypt, and as far as we knew, he could end up pretty much anywhere, any old town in Egypt. But he didn't end up anywhere. He ended up in the capital city. And that's important because that's going to make possible his later encounter with other servants of Pharaoh, which in turn will make possible Joseph's own day to stand before the Pharaoh and interpret the Pharaoh's dream, which opens the door to all of the things that God has brought Joseph to Egypt for. And so, in other words, already in the seemingly chance outcome of Joseph having been sold to someone in this particular city, we can see God's hand at work in the shaping of these events. Joseph himself may not see it yet, but later he'll be able to look back on this initial arrival in Egypt and see that God was directing his path for the sake of his future plan, or his plan for Joseph's future. Make that a little more clear. Notice that in verse 2, the author makes a very explicit statement. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. Now, that's a pretty remarkable statement, given that the immediate preceding verse told us that Joseph had been sold into slavery. No doubt it may have been easy for Joseph to think that he had been abandoned by his family. And in addition to that, maybe even his God as well. I mean, if you think about what he has endured over the days or weeks that have passed since his brothers initially sold him into slavery. I mean, he went from being the favorite son of his father, the one who got all the favored status, to being the newest slave of his master. It's a pretty big transition. But Joseph wasn't abandoned, and he wasn't alone. The Lord was with him. And just as his father Jacob had prospered in Haran with the Lord's help, Jacob now was prospering in Egypt with the Lord's help. We often convince ourselves that success looks a certain way. Success at work means reaching the top, or success at school means finishing within a certain percentage of the class. Success in life means perhaps a certain house in a certain neighborhood, or a vehicle of a certain class, or a net worth over a certain amount of money. How many of us would have a definition of success that included being a slave owned by someone else? That's the position that Joseph is in when the author calls him a successful man. Notice that the author doesn't say that Joseph is a man who will someday be successful. He doesn't say a man with the potential and the drive to be successful. He says a successful man. Joseph was already successful even as a slave. That's because his success came not from his position in life, or from his job, or from his education, or his income, or anything else that the world might credit success to. His success came from the Lord. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. Period. Joseph was so successful, in fact, that his master couldn't help but notice it. Interestingly, Potiphar also recognized the source of Joseph's success. Verse 3, take a look there. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. How did Potiphar know that it was the Lord who was causing Joseph's success? It's an interesting question. There's one explanation that seems most likely, I think, and that is simply Joseph told him so. Potiphar knew what this verse says he knew, that it was the Lord who caused all that Joseph did to prosper, because Joseph himself told him. You know, there's no particular reason to expect that this random Egyptian would have been familiar with the Lord, apart from what he heard from Joseph. But if Joseph is telling his master about God and crediting his own success to the Lord, then that tells us a great deal about Joseph's frame of mind. Even in the midst of his own slavery, Joseph had not turned his back on God. And when his master took note of his successes, which of course would have involved a lot of hard work on Joseph's part, Joseph could easily have taken all the credit. But he chose instead to credit it to the Lord. As a result, his master trusted him with everything. Nothing in the house was not under Joseph's charge. All of it was part of Joseph's responsibility, and as a result, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all he owned in the house and in the field. Potiphar's house was experiencing the fulfillment of the Lord's promise to Abraham. I will bless those who bless you. That's what God told Abraham way back in chapter 12 when he first established this special relationship with Abraham and his family. But again, I can't help but wonder if our own definitions of bless those who bless you, particularly that last part, those who bless you, if that would have included the situation that Joseph finds himself in. He was a highly trusted and valued slave, but he's still a slave. I suspect that if we were in Joseph's shoes, we wouldn't be very tempted to think of Potiphar's actions as a blessing to us unless they included giving us our freedom. How often do you think might we be missing the blessings and the successes that the Lord is providing us in our own lives just because we are expecting them to look a little bit different than they do? Joseph could easily have missed what the Lord was doing if he had put his focus on all of his problems and the ways in which he was struggling and suffering instead of looking for what the Lord was actually doing. I think we can fall into the same trap. Joseph, however, didn't. Joseph also was blessed in other ways, apparently, as well. The author notes that he was handsome in form and appearance. All right, that's well, it's a tough life to live, but some of us do what we can with it. This isn't a random detail that the author is providing, but is apparently an attempt to explain what happens next. Whether it's because of his appearance, or his successes, or both, Potiphar's wife finds herself attracted to Joseph. Her attempts to seduce Joseph were in all likelihood a good bit more wordy than the brief summary that the author gives us here. But the summary is clear enough, and her demand from Joseph is unmistakable. Joseph could have responded by taking advantage of the trust his master had placed in him and gone along with her demand. It certainly was an option to him. But instead, he refuses, and he gives her two reasons for its refusal. First of all, his master trusts him, and his master has not withheld from him anything in the house except for her. Therefore, in Joseph's eyes, if he were to go along with her request, it would be a violation of that trust, and Joseph is not willing to violate it. Secondly, it would be a great evil and sin against God. And so not only is he unwilling to do what's wrong in the eyes of his master, he's unwilling to do what's wrong in the eyes of his God. And he's willing to tell her both of those things as why he's not going to go along with it. Potiphar's wife continued to try and tempt Joseph day after day without success. And notice, by the way, that she is without success. Joseph, the slave, has success in everything he does, but the wife, a free woman, fails at every attempt. It's a little bit ironic, isn't it? Ultimately, she finds herself with an opportunity. She and Joseph are alone in the house. The setting seems to be the case that Potiphar's duties to the Pharaoh would have had him out of the house all day anyway. But there were other slaves living in the house besides Joseph, all of whom by this point are under Joseph's charge. But here they are. Potiphar's wife has found an opportunity where all of those other people are outside, presumably working in the fields or something like that, and that only she and Joseph are in the house. And so the author says she caught him by his garment and again demanded that he have sex with her. Now, the fact that when he turns to flee, his garment remains in her hand suggests that whatever it is exactly that the author means when he says that she caught him by his garment, it must have involved actually removing it, so that when he runs, it stays with her while he goes away. Whether he's driven by fear of someone walking in on them while he is without his garment along with her, or perhaps he's just caught off guard by the sheer forcefulness of this particular attempt at seducing him. Joseph responded by turning and running. His goal in doing so was to get outside of the other house to where the other men of the household were at. Now, like we said, they're probably all other slaves, but more importantly, in this moment, they're all potential witnesses. Joseph wants to be in a place where people can see him because he does not want to be alone where nobody knows what's really happening while he's with her. Before Joseph could tell anybody, though, what had happened, maybe he's still trying to run out of the house, maybe they're just further away than in the yard or something like that. Potiphar's wife calls out to the men, probably from an open window or something like that, who are outside, and accuses Joseph of attempting to rape her, holding up, of course, his garment as evidence. And what's Joseph to do? Remember, he may be in charge of everything, but he's still just a slave, and she's not. She's the wife of the master. She says he did this, and she has evidence that she says supports her claim. What's Joseph to do? He's in a position where he really has nowhere to turn. And that's part of why I think when Potiphar shows up and he hears from his wife the accusation that she's making against Joseph, he grows so angry. What could Joseph even do to try to persuade him of his innocence? There's nothing Joseph could do in his own benefit that wouldn't condemn the master's wife. It's stuck between a rock and a hard place for Joseph. And that may be why we don't even see an attempt in the text from Joseph to defend himself. Presumably he would have said something. I don't know if he would have condemned the master's wife outright. Presumably he would have been honest. But we're not told. The author doesn't tell us of any attempt on Joseph's part to defend himself. And perhaps more importantly, we're not told of any attempt from Potiphar to determine the truth. He just hears the accusation, believes it, and takes vengeance on Joseph. Notice, by the way, that when the wife repeats the accusation to her husband, she managed to blame him for what had happened. The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to me to make sport of me. Potiphar believes the wife and her accusation, throws Joseph into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. That's the way the jail is described to us, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now, is Joseph a prisoner of the king? Well, he's a prisoner of Potiphar, perhaps. Maybe they made some sort of official charge against him. But that reference to the king's prisoners is more important than just a passing detail. Because next week we'll see how he encounters some of these specific prisoners of the king, and it has a big impact on his story. But, of course, this is how he gets there. The jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, is where Potiphar takes him and stashes him. To the casual observer, it would seem that Joseph's life has just managed to go from bad to worse. First, he was betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery in a foreign land. That's pretty bad. Now he has been betrayed by his master's wife and thrown into prison. Seems worse. Most people would almost certainly feel hopeless, I think, and ready to give up on life at this point if they were in Joseph's shoes. But just as Joseph's purchase by Potiphar had brought him one step closer to ruling alongside Pharaoh and saving his family, so too his betrayal by Potiphar's family has brought him one step closer still. And what about all the success that he had experienced because the Lord was with him? Is Joseph now in jail because the Lord has abandoned him? Certainly not. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. Just as the Lord had been with Joseph the slave and blessed all that he did, so too the Lord is now with Joseph the prisoner and will continue to bless all that he does. And just as Joseph had, with the Lord's help, earned a position of trust with Potiphar, he will do the same again with the chief jailer. Again, it may not match up to our definitions of success, but it was success nonetheless. And because Joseph's successes were from the Lord, the world couldn't rob him of it. Potiphar's wife may have thought that she succeeded in doing so when she watched as her husband dragged him off to the jail. But all she really did was she moved Joseph to another place where the Lord would continue to make him prosper until the day comes when Pharaoh himself will take note of it. Remember that eventually Joseph is going to be in charge of all of Egypt, including Potiphar's wife, the one thing that Potiphar had withheld from him that was under his care. All of this, from our perspective, if we put ourselves in Joseph's shoes and think about what it would be like to experience these things, it just feels like he's falling down the rabbit hole and he's getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and his situation is getting bleaker and bleaker. And yet, that's not really the case at all, because the Lord is guiding him through all of this. And each little experience along the way brings him closer and closer to fulfilling those dreams that the Lord had given him when he was young, where he is ruling over everyone else. And by that, he's going to save the covenant family. That the Lord has been doing all of this in preparation for that moment. And of course, the next step of it is going to take place in the jail that Joseph is now imprisoned in. And so we'll see in chapter 40 on Wednesday night at the church exactly what happens with Joseph in the jail. And so I look forward to seeing you there as we continue on this journey through the book of Genesis.